Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a new webinar on the Housing First Europe Hub. We salute you from Berlin today because we are starting today our Train the Trainer program here in Berlin. So it's a happy day for us. But we today also have this webinar on Housing First in Italy. It's a very, very special occasion to know more about the reality of this methodology in Italy, and we have two of the best speakers possible for this matter. So in the first place, we will have Teresa Consoli, which is the author of one of the articles on the European Journal on Homelessness. It is a very, very special guest since she's a sociologist at the University of Catania, and she will speak about welfare policy and homelessness in Italy, a needed change in policy approach and practice, which is the article on the journal. And also we will have Giuseppe Dardes, trainer and coordinator of Housing First, the Italian Housing First community at fio.PSD, who will speak about how the work of fio.PSD community can help generate systemic change. So feel free to ask any question. It will take approximately 15 minutes each to speak, and then we will have this Q&A session about 10 minutes. So let me pass the floor to Teresa Consoli, which I really need to thank because she doesn't feel really well today. So we really appreciate the effort she's doing today due to this cold. So hopefully, Teresa, you feel okay during this webinar, but let us know if you need anything from our side. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Arturo. Thanks a lot for your understanding, and sorry for my voice. I have no voice until yesterday, so it's good that I can speak, but I know that the sound is terrible, so sorry for that. I'll try to do my best. So if possible, I'll try to share my screen. So first of all, I really would like to thank you for inviting me. I have to say that the article that you mentioned was for me a very interesting attempt to find a way on what was going on in Italy, because I hope, I'm sure that Giuseppe will tell us something about that. But there was last year there was a conference by FIOPS on systemic changes, more than 1 year ago, and I was curious about that. So I was curious about understanding what systemic change was meant. And also I read, of course, the publication Demos Helsinki, a new system perspective for ending homelessness, and the other achieving a new systems perspective for ending homelessness through Housing First, a policy and practice guide. And that was really very useful for me in order to understand and to redefine what was going on in it. So first of all, thank you for that, for reading the article, which is not nowadays, we publish articles, but this does not mean that we can discuss about them. So first of all, thank you for that, and thank you for this occasion, because I think that it's really important to share and discuss about the content and how we can focus on homelessness and the different modules and approach in the country. So I would like to share with you first of all what the welfare in Italy can be in some ways described, because homelessness is of course part of social policy. I cannot see the questions, but Arturo, if there's any question concerning my presentation, would you please tell me something? Because I see that there are some questions, but...
Sure, I'll let you know.
Thanks a lot. So the first thing that I would like to share with you is that when we are talking about homelessness, we are talking about also a policy and a social policy within country. And the kind of welfare and the so-called welfare regime makes the difference on the ways homelessness can be focused and treated, and therefore in some ways faced. So the characteristics of the welfare and the welfare system in Italy are quite interesting, and there are many, of course, studies and approach. Usually Italy is defined as one of the Mediterranean countries, so with specific characteristics in the welfare organization. But I would like to underline just a couple of these characteristics, which I think are strategic for homelessness. So the fact that in some ways is a mixed model. What is defined as a mixed model? Because it has a universalistic approach, still universalistic approach for health, but a corporativist approach. But these two main characteristics of the welfare system in Italy have changed and are changing quite strongly in the last years. And within these two characteristics, what has emerged in the last years is that there's a high polarization within Italy between categories of what we call insiders and outsiders, so eligible beneficiaries of the welfare services. So, and there's a strong differentiation of welfare service provision among the different regions. So we are not talking about the same way. There's a strong regionalization, and there's an absent provision of homogeneous low threshold services. So high differentiated and with no low threshold services that can be defined as common welfare. On the top of that, which is not a very nice scenario, we really have no housing policies. What does it mean? It means that in comparing Italian social housing to other European countries, we have only 4% of the public social housing. So it's a very small percentage of social housing, and there's a low investment on social housing policies. At least there are changes in the last years, but basically, unless the period after the Second World War, after the 70s and 80s, there's no real housing policy that we can define as common housing policy in Italy. But this is due also because the change in housing that we can see almost in all countries in Italy has defined a strong privatization of housing. So there's an increase of ownership of housing rather than investment in public housing. So as a result of all that, homelessness is still perceived as what can be defined a private issue on the shoulder of the person in homelessness. It's not a public issue. And it has been basically treated through an emergency approach. We have very nice and good experiences. Giuseppe will tell us what's going on. And there are very extremely interesting approach also. Of course, housing first is the most interesting one, but it's not the only one. So, but still, the basic approach to homelessness can be described as an emergency approach. And this is also in some ways can be seen also in public data on housing and homelessness. The data on homelessness, the latest data dates back to 2014, the one collected through a point-in-time survey by the National Statistical Institute. But there's been a publication 2 years ago, which is based on administrative data. So, and that kind of data are not described the condition of homelessness in Italy, but people who are registered as homeless in the single different municipalities. So as a result of all this situation, looking at publication on system perspective to ending homelessness, I tried to define, and I found some similarities with Spain, which is of course similar also because of the Mediterranean regime that I was mentioning before. But in the publication on system change, there was this analysis of different kind of governance, and Spain was described as fragmented governance, and I think that Italy can be considered in the same line as Spain. So the latest change that I would like to mention, but I'm sure that Giuseppe will give us more details on that, is that there's no doubt on the growing political attention and scientific interest on homelessness. We have also published with FIOPS, but there are many articles. There's a public interest that I would like to mention also, that we are into this European homelessness count. So Italy is in some ways trying to have more political and scientific attention towards this phenomena. And the first thing that I need to mention, because I think it's really strategic, is this national guidelines for tackling severe adult marginality, which has been published thanks also to the support of FIOPS, but also to the latest data by National Statistical Institute published in 2014, and these national guidelines in which housing first was mentioned for the first time as a national policy. As a matter of fact, after this publication and just before that, FIOPS implemented the network Housing First Italy. So the community, which will be described, I think, by Giuseppe. So there's a growing interest and a growing discussion on what Housing First is, how can be implemented. On my side, I followed the first 2 years of implementation of Housing First, and that was a very interesting experience. Of course, I have to mention that the economic condition of the country have fallen more and more. So that we have more people in poverty, and there's a growing housing distress. So considering what I've mentioned before on housing policy and summing to that also the gentrification that is going on in many Italian cities, I use this, as many other scholars, these Disneyland cities. So there's more and more this touristic way of looking at how to leave the cities, and this means that there's less available and affordable housing because, of course, it's much more convenient. We have 70% of ownership of housing, and it's much more convenient for them to put it into the touristic market rather than to provide for people for housing, for rent. So this changes. I was looking at the what was called the systemic change in the publication by Housing First Europe Hub, and I was looking at three main keys for change: directionality, learning, and capacity building. Of course, these are not in the same line that are described in the publication by the Europe app, but sometimes, so in some ways gives the idea of what's going on. So directionality, I think that at the political level, there's a growing political attention on homelessness, and this, we have to say that it has pros and cons. Because in some ways, as you all know, sometimes this political attention can be used also in using homeless people and homelessness as a political issue, but not really providing for them the service that they need. So there's sometimes there's a big debate, but how, for example, to give major of the municipalities instruments not to show or to let homeless people to stay in the cities. So there's still an emergency and temporary approach prevailing in many cities and in many municipalities, and the basic national level of local social services is still missing. So the differentiation that I mentioned at the beginning is still there, even though there are many policies, especially financed by the National Resilience Plan, but there's no national level on local social services. At the operational level, I think that what we can identify as bottlenecks are housing exclusion. No doubt, but there's a problem on access to housing in Italy that is not really mentioned as a political debate, unless in some cases, for example, we have some protests by students going into the north of Italy and not getting access to feasible rents, but not really as a housing issue. So housing, social housing, and prevention of homelessness. So there's still, it's still very difficult at municipal and national level to implement preventative policies and not to face homelessness, but to prevent homelessness to be a manifest phenomenon. And this means that a capacity building, there are many interesting experiences at present in Italy, scattered all over the country, linked to housing first, to housing-led policy, to housing first. But, and I have to recognize that the role of FIOPS has been strategic in this support, but there's still no national approach to homelessness and no national policies. So just final comments, and that's the end. No real national monitoring and evaluation on the national guidelines, and still a strong role given to local municipalities. And they do not necessarily have enough strength to face homelessness. There's a growing hidden homelessness. We know that more and more families, not only migrants, which has been a case in Italy, but also families, Italian families, women. And so the hidden homelessness is growing, but we have no prevention on falling into homelessness. And public housing policies and data collection of homelessness is still very weak, because public means that there should be a collection of data and of policies that should be in some ways debated. And while we have data collected by different organizations that do not describe the same situation and do not really face homelessness as it should in Italy. So thank you very much. I hope that my voice was clear enough, and sorry for that.
It was more than clear. Thank you, Teresa, for such a clarifying presentation. And thanks for staying with us for the Q&A session later. And now it's time for Giuseppe to tell us about the role of fio.PSD in this mission. So Giuseppe, ready when you are.
Thanks. I try to share my presentation. Thank you, Arturo, for the invitation and the chance to share our work in Italy about systemic change and the role of housing first and community housing first. The goal of this presentation is to describe how the work of promoting housing first is contributing to systemic change, and then share our challenges to continue to strengthen housing first as a lever of systemic change in our country. Our work is in the groove of two national events dedicated to systemic change, and the last one in particular outlined the lines of our future work on housing. Some words about the community. Our network is called HFI, the Italian HF community, and was born in 2020 at the height of the pandemic to take up and relaunch the work of the Housing First Italian network. Teresa speak about the start of our work as Housing First Italian network. The network born in 2014 associated private social entities and public bodies interested in experimenting the housing first approach in our country. Today, as you read, the community has 56 members distributed in 14 regions and 35 cities. Practically, the whole national territory is represented with a prevalence of adherents in northern Italy. Some words about country situation afterwards of Teresa. The official number of homeless people in our country refers, as he said, to a 2030 survey. That year it was estimated in 50,724 for the most severe ethos categories. We are certain of a general increase in the phenomenon, but we are lobbying our government to launch a new official survey. For HF, for example, the number of people accommodated is higher than the number of people accommodated by the community member organizations. For these people accommodated in projects unrelated to our work, we have a difficulty in estimating and monitoring. About political scenario, center-right government seems of blaming poverty, alarm over the sharp drop in minimum income and the real risk that it will be taken away from homeless people. This is a situation could jeopardize many HF projects that value the contribution of minimum income and an additional special contribution on housing. For many entities, it will be a step backwards of many years compared to the progression of method activation of homeless people and the co-participation achieved in recent years through the adoption of housing first. Overall, with respect to policy for homelessness, there is a risk of a contraction of proximity activities, of reception, and of the offer of integration paths. At the same time, we have a very strong increase of European funds, recovery fund, after the pandemic. In particular, two types of projects called One-Stop Shop for Tackle Poverty and Housing First Temporary Housing. When we found out, we had the same reaction as you, joy and surprise for the first part. HF finally, the government has chosen to invest in it, sees it strategically, promotes its adoption at a territorial level, beyond the usual perimeter of big cities. Immediately afterwards, sadness and bewilderment. Why just oppose temporary with housing first? Why this contradiction in terms? FIOPS, was asked by ministry to make an evaluation of the projects. In the coming months, we hope to be able to monitor and support the public authorities to help them give the right name to the activities, for example, by not confusing HF and temporary housing, and offer our support to ensure that housing first projects are as close as possible to the approach codified at European and international level. What we do? Housing First Italy as an agile, a clever way of saying poor or limited structure. I am the coordinator, but the entire FIOP Secretariat supports the work of the community at the busiest times. A community coordinated by a trainer could only focus on training. Our offer always being evaluated and improved today includes basic course, webinars, community of practice, continuing educational school, operational coaching, and study and monitoring. Just these days, we are starting the national monitoring that will allow us have a picture after 10 years of Housing First in Italy. And now our challenges in promoting change. The first is improve and grow community membership and participation, strengthen listening and connection with others, increase membership, highlighting the usefulness and added value of joining the community so that it becomes attractive to realities that want to start up Housing First projects or imagine an innovation in their way of working with homeless people. To promote horizontal exchange, study visits and comparison between organizations on the Italian territory, and we hope also in European with other European countries. Activate interest groups to deepen crucial areas for the development of Housing First. Youth Housing First, and support to LGBTQ+ people, and to the end, the structure and the partly enriched training offer with a stable and clear program during the year. This is our first challenge. The second, promote loyalty to the model and encourage experimentation and social innovation. This will be a demanding challenge because we will have to help those who are planning and are close to realizing the 250 projects financed by the PNRR in Italy, National Recovery and Resilience Plan, to distinguish Housing First from other forms of housing, and that were possible to use those funds to start up Housing First projects and then give them sustainability and continuity with different funds. This is an interesting challenge for us because FIOPS asked us to making Housing First a node in the political network on the housing challenge. In particular, FIOPS asked us to valorize the specific know-how the Housing First so that it can inspire and orientate experimentation and adaptation also with other targets. There is a growing mobilization to address the problem of accessibility of housing, affordable housing, for example, with the creation of a national network on the issue of housing policies. And with HFI, we want to be able to tell the need and the value of being able to give space also to the rights of the homeless with the successful experience of Housing First. And others, strengthening the credibility of Housing First approach in Italy, data collection and European international collection. Since we were born in 2014, two things have been important for our credibility: study and research through monitoring and data collection on Housing First projects, and European connection, the participation in this hub and the training of 7 operators in the different edition of Train the Trainer. Today, we must quickly resume by finding ways of funding data collection and the publication of a report on the results of Housing First projects in our country, and connecting with Europe at times like this rather than with training and exchanges strengthens our credibility in Italy because it is perceived that we are part of a larger movement with the international authority. And the last change for us now is finding resources to give sustainability to the project in the coming years. Today, many resources for personal expenses, the highest cost item for organizations like ours, come from public funding or from the remuneration of individual training projects. In order to give sustainability and continuity to the project over the next few years, it is necessary to find dedicated resources to direct the work towards what I indicated in the first challenge, the care and the growth of the community through community animation work. It is probable that a part may come from a remodeling of membership costs. And to close, but not to close on money, I would like to share a conviction that is the same one that led me to join the work on Housing First. We need to give more emphasis to the theme of how the quality of life of Housing First guests changes. As the Italian title of a beautiful book by Deborah Paget reminds us, this is a story that changes stories. I believe that people's lives must have primacy in our communication. Homelessness is an inhuman condition. Housing First is a concrete possibility to reduce and counteract that unacceptable condition. So if we want to aim for zero homelessness, we must attach the plow of our work to Housing First. If you want to draw your forest right, attach your plow to a star. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thanks, Giuseppe, for such an inspiring end of your presentation. It's always really inspiring to see why we do the work we do. So while we give time for people to write more questions on the Q&A box, I would like to start with a question for Giuseppe, but also for Teresa, if you want to answer. I would like to ask you regarding the resistance that you find in the staircase system when you advocate on Housing First, and how do you overcome it? So in other words, what are the best tips to seduce staircase organizations and policymakers to endorse Housing First projects?
It's not simple, the answer to this question. For me, in our experience, the public service, there is a continuity of way to work. Therefore, when we share Housing First as an innovative project and as evidence-based project, evidence-based model, the excellent results, they are afraid to change their model to work, and therefore often they said us, but it's not possible to realize Housing First here because we haven't human resource, because we haven't money resource, but we understand that often the fatigue is about the way the organization of their work. Housing First is a challenge on the way to organize the work. Is a big challenge for social workers, for leaders of organization, and it's not simple for them to change. But we try to change this resistance, these difficulties with trainings, with more trainings, and with share best practice. When they discovered best practice in other territory or in municipality near them, they wow, now it's possible. Therefore, we try with these few steps, but it's not simple.
Thanks, Giuseppe. So we have a question from the audience. So Judy Wright is asking if you can tell if there is any service in Italy whom support ex-prisoners with being released homeless. So is there any, maybe Teresa wants to...
Yes, I wanted to add something to the first question. And
all right, sure.
try to answer, because as Giuseppe said, there is an issue about power relation in social services that should be investigated more. I mean, that there's a change. The Housing First, it's really a challenge in the definition of the role of social workers, first of all. And this is always underestimated, has always been like that in welfare provision. But in this specific case, talking about Housing First, the dynamic of power relation is really another relevant issue that should be taken into consideration. But the main issue that I would like to underline is the housing availability. So Housing First needs a real social housing policy. And the attempt and the challenge is especially, this is for me one of the most interesting thing that Housing First has shown, that housing is a pillar of welfare and should be treated as health. It's not like that in Italy. It has not been like that. So privatization of housing has an effect on availability of social housing and the concept of available housing, affordable housing, also for public administration. So it's a challenge, but it's really very difficult to find available houses, and to rebuild what can be said as trust relations between home owners, rent, and third actors, whatever actors can be. So on the side of ex-prisoners, I have no real answer because it's linked. I'm not sure, Giuseppe, maybe you have more news about that. But this is also linked to social housing. So there are no, as far as I know, services for ex-prisoners.
I can say there are no specific services, but in some areas, the value and the potential of Housing First is also being grasped for the reintegration of ex-offenders. A specific focus on its target audience is being experimented with in Turin. Some colleagues of Turin work with detenuti.
There are experiments, but there are no national service.
No national service. No, absolutely.
And I think that Elisabetta, if I can go to the next question.
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, the presence of paperless migrants had a great impact on homelessness services, because that was, I don't know, on Housing First, maybe Giuseppe can say something, but on homeless services, what we can see is that the prevalence of people in the streets are migrants. So, and there's a growing number of people, of course, undocumented, paperless migrants that are in the streets. This we can see in the north of Italy more, but it's the same in the south. So it's an issue. It's an issue, yes.
But for now, the law makes it very difficult to accommodate people in this condition in Housing First. There is a really big problem for us in this moment.
You know that there's also this process that we can define as criminalization of migration. Yes. So it's even more difficult than before. So it's very difficult to support migrants to get access to services. It was difficult before, and now it's even more difficult.
The first step for service when meet people with problem in appunto paperless migrants is to help them to regularize their position with law and get, so come si dice, permesso di soggiorno,
permits of stay. But it takes a long time to get it. So
yes.
So, well, the thing is, it's already 11:45, and we know that Teresa is not feeling really well today. And since there is no other question in the Q&A box, I would like to thank both speakers for your presence today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Teresa, for your presentation and your time. And thanks, Giuseppe. We are looking forward to see that study on the 10 years of Housing First in Italy. I'm sure there will be a lot of things to be proud of, and also challenges for the future ahead. So looking forward to that. And thanks also to Lucia Fiorello that was behind the scenes as well. And thanks for all the people that were in the audience, especially to those that made the questions. Thank you for your interest. We will advertise new webinars very soon. The next one will be in Denmark, will be based on Denmark, so it will be very, very interesting as well. So thank you all, and see you very, very soon. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good day. Thanks. Bye.